So in this video, I'm going to revise how to do Romeo and Juliet revision for Year 10 Langdon Park students for the mocks in December. I'm going to be going through this in class, and I will be doing this in the Tuesday morning revision session. So obviously, I'm going to try and just go through the basics, but the last video was a bit long because I went through them in detail. You studied Romeo and Juliet in Year 9, so this is all revision. And in the revision of it, we've only got probably halfway through the play. So we've really been looking at two main themes, which is love and conflict. And today I'm just going to focus you in on the idea of conflict and that particular theme. I'm going to talk about context, then I'm going to talk about how to answer the question overall. So there are a lot of themes for conflict that are relevant. The long grudge between the Montagues and the Capulets, the way the prince wants to calm down Verona, the way Capulet asserts his power over Tybalt later in the play, how he asserts his power over the nurse and over his daughter. Capulet's really quite a subtle but well-developed character. There's, of course, the deadly hatred between Mercutio and Tybalt that leads to both of their deaths. There is actually a kind of tension between the nurse and Juliet after Romeo kills Tybalt. You need to think about a theme conceptually as it applies to different moments in the play. When you see a question, some moments in the play should bubble up to the front of your mind. I mean, you get an extract, of course, but when you're asked to write about the play as a whole, that extract should fit into a bigger schema of the play overall. Now, conflict I just want you to think about, conflict isn't itself a theme that is really situated in one place. That could include violence. It could include aggression, the fact that the way, what motivates this conflict is a sense of male bravado and a need to intimidate. The idea of disagreeing, the idea of different viewpoints. These are all ways of thinking about conflict going into this mock and going into the exam in general. So just thinking about it, again, more broadly, what is conflict in the play? Men feel the need to be violent to prove that they are men. I think being a man, what is a man, is explored a lot in this play. Everywhere there's conflict. On the streets, in the home, between people, everywhere seems like conflict is a residue. Like love, it doesn't have reason, it's irrational, and it forces people to act irrationally. And it leads to death, conflict. I mean, one could argue in this play, both love and conflict lead to death. So, I've talked with you a lot, and I'm going to hopefully remind you in lesson tomorrow and on Tuesday morning about the use of context. And I've given you a bunch of context to think about. But for this exam, you need to think about what contexts matter to you. And the thing is, it's not just about tacking on context. Context has to be relevant to the theme. Whatever the theme is, you need to find a way of making your context link. If you can't, there's no point. So setting is just one of those things I'd ask you to think about for this exam. Hierarchies, these are all things that we've given you in your packet. They're basic context that you might want to think about. You might also want to think about things like honor, about dueling, about the way families work. And it's not just about one sentence. It's about understanding and explaining the context and then applying it to the question. Though, just like with Jekyll and Hyde, it's all about making the context relevant to help your analysis, to help your argument forward. So, we would recommend you spend a little bit more time on Romeo and Juliet because there are 4 extra marks for spelling, punctuation, and grammar, which I'm not really going to go into right now. But it's 55 minutes for this part of the exam. Again, just like with Jekyll and Hyde, you get an extract and the whole play. You got to talk about context. So just like with Jekyll and Hyde, my strategy is going to be that no matter what happens, you have to identify at least 3 quotes. And what might happen is the extract is really hard, or it's really easy and there's nothing to get a hold of there. That's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky for you, and you'll feel, confused. But what I want you to remember is no matter what happens, you can get 3 quotes. And again, if you can get a backup quote, something backing up your idea, you show all the more mastery of this passage. Your 3 quotes should cover the passage, not all be clustered at the top or at the bottom. But most important, they have to be relevant. It doesn't matter where they are or what they are, as long as they are relevant to the theme of the question. So you'll get an extract. This is an extract that we haven't looked at in the revision, but I just used, which is at the end when Romeo discovers the body of Juliet and he's ready to kill himself. So a question might look something like this, starting with the speech. Explore how Shakespeare presents extreme emotions. That's your theme. Everything you're writing about is going to be related to that theme. In this speech and in the play as a whole, that's what you got to do. So right away, you've identified the key words. You've identified in the speech and in the play as a whole. By the way, you have maybe 5 minutes to plan. You read really quickly. You're familiar with the passage. You pick the key phrases that help you figure out what's important. You identify those key quotes. So for me, they are here. He talks about lightning before death. He talks about death sucking the honey of breath, and he talks about her not being conquered yet. And I'm just sketching out my notes on what those phrases might mean. And then my job is to develop one topic sentence for each of these. How are extreme emotions shown? 1, Shakespeare shows extreme emotions. 2, Shakespeare shows extreme emotions. 3, just getting those 3 down. I do this very quickly, and I'll just give you one example. So, Shakespeare presents contrasts to represent Romeo's extreme feelings. I'm going to use all this evidence, but I'm going to integrate it, and I'm not showing that here. That's something you've got to work on. I do my word analysis. The word Mary suggests, the image. I explain it, I extend my explanation, and then I return to the question. Shakespeare shows Romeo's extreme emotions through his use of imagery. So I'm making sure I talk about the author, because it's a conscious construction. I make sure I'm talking about the theme, and if I can use a device, but most important, I'm using an argument. I'm using evidence to back up my idea. Hopefully I pick my evidence first, so always my argument is relevant. I analyze the language, I explain the language, and I move on. So here's another example if you want to work on it. In this passage, Shakespeare shows the extremity of emotion through the personification of death. So how would you use this second bit of evidence to build that paragraph? That would be your job. Making the argument is not an easy thing, and we've been working a lot on that in the past week in particular, and I hope that you're starting to feel more confident about developing an argument. So, from there, we've got to start thinking about the play as a whole. Again, you're in the first 5 minutes of planning this. You have to plan this, you have to revise this so well that in your mind you're ready to go. For me, I see extreme emotions when Romeo broke up with Rosalind, when Romeo sees Juliet for the first time, Tybalt's rage, Mercutio's death, Nurse's anger. Those are just easy moments that come to my mind. When I think about context, I think about Italy, I think about the idea of suicide and religious attitudes towards suicide. I think about love and marriage at this time, and how love wasn't really an expectation of marriage. And these extreme emotions, while being entertaining, would seem maybe odd or extreme to the audience. Once I've done that, it's similar to Jekyll and Hyde, of course, where you are bundling the moment to a context, and you'll build a Pee-wee paragraph. Now, if you can remember a quote, evidence can also be a moment, just reminding the examiner of the relevant moment that you're talking about. Maybe you can't remember a quote, but you can remember what's going on. You can approximate the quote. That's also permitted because it's a closed book exam. But either way, what you want is 3 more Pee-wee paragraphs with context. And here I will give you an example. Shakespeare shows extremity of emotions when he first shows Romeo as heartbroken. Romeo says his heart is made of lead because Rosalind has refused to sleep with him. I just remembered that one-word quote, and I'm going to use that to get through this exam. Lead suggests heaviness and weight that is overly dramatic and exaggerated. Romeo always seems to feel things deeply. Shakespeare shows the extremity of Catholic emotion and irrationality. This intensity of love is dangerous and leads to the greatest Christian sin, suicide. Shakespeare thus uses religion and responses to love to show extreme feelings in Romeo and Juliet. I think I could use another sentence to explain this a little bit further. But what I've tried to do is use context to build this paragraph. So, for this exam, just like with Jekyll and Hyde, we're using 3 paragraphs on the passage and 3 on the context, plus an introduction.